Hi, I'm Doug O'Brien. Welcome back to the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. You know, in the past few months, years, I've had various people on this podcast asking about their recollections of what they've learned from Dave Dobson. They've been over the general heading of what I've learned from Dave. And many of the times that I had people on here, I was asking them specifically about this process that Dave did called the subjective reversal. And I've mentioned to people over the years, perhaps I've mentioned it to you, that Dave was a wonderful teacher, except that he was a really bad teacher. In other words, he demonstrated, like Erickson, he demonstrated what he was doing, but he wasn't always that explicit about how to do it. You know, what are the first steps, second steps? He didn't really like that sort of thing. He even frowned on us taking notes about various things. But I was really thinking about this. I remember John Morgan talking about the subjective reversal, how he incorporated some of the language in it when he did his John Morgan seminars for weight loss, smoking cessation around the country. He'd say things like, and every time you have an urge to smoke, you'll feel calm and relaxed. Every time you have an urge to eat pizza, instead you'll feel calm and relaxed. So you take the thing that's the trigger and you cause it, that trigger for something bad, and you have that same trigger cause something good. So it's a subjective reversal. It causes the opposite, really, of what it is. Recently, I was talking with my friend Harlan Kilstein about this thing, and I said, Harlan, guess what? I found my notes. Let me show it to you. I found my notes. Dave was also very funny about not wanting people to take notes. He thought we were left braining it and stuff. But I found these notes from 1988. Those are my notes about the subjective reversal. You see how copious I took notes. Oh my God, every detail is listed there. It says, basically what I just said to you. So you take the thing that they felt bad about. But there's an interesting example here. I don't know if you can see it very clearly, but there's a woman who was upset by the man snoring. And Dave said, okay, so now when you hear him snoring, you're going to feel comfy and cozy, or words to that effect. Very nice. But again, doesn't really give a lot of detail about how to do that. So again, I was talking with my friend Harlan, and he said, well, why don't you just watch the video? He's pretty explicit in the video. And I went like, what video? What are you talking about? There's a video. Dave made a video about the subjective reversal. And he said, yeah. And he has a copy. And I said, okay, why don't you tell me about that? So Harlan, you'd probably be happy that I mentioned that. I did the little Freudian slip. Harlan is here today to tell us about what he knows about the subjective reversal and how maybe we might actually get a very clear answer, finally, about how to do this thing. And that's coming up right after these little messages from our sponsor, which is, of course, not our sponsor at all. It's just my introduction little stuff that goes exactly like this. You are listening to the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast, a show devoted to uncovering the systems and the secrets that set the best apart, where you learn how to take your coaching clients to the next level, while you grow the coaching practice of your dreams. So sit back and relax, or sit up and get excited. Either way, you might want to pay attention. This could be important. Harlan Kilstein.
Hey. First of all, you know, when you showed me the clip and it listed all of the experts, I didn't see my face on that list of experts.
Really?
Yeah.
I'll have to revise the list then.
Definitely front and center.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's virtually nobody more expert than you, Harlan.
So, you were dealing with Dave earlier than I was, and I joined the show. And I remember, it's probably been mentioned on one of our prior podcasts, that we called you afterwards to try and decode what Dave was doing. Because, as you said, Dave didn't particularly care to explain. And if you asked him straight out questions, he would toss an insult at you.
Yeah, he is. If I may say something about that, yeah, that is exactly what happened. You called me. I had no idea who you were. I was living in Vermont at the time, and the phone rings, and it's this person who'd just come from Dave and wanted to know if I could explain what Dave was doing. And I was going, well, I can talk about it. I don't know if I can explain it exactly, but we could do our best. We've had many such conversations ever since. And yeah, Dave, it's funny because Dave was always talking about how you must be courteous to the other than conscious mind, but he could be downright discourteous to a person's conscious mind. So, so like he could be pretty like curmudgeonly and insulting. Why don't you just grow up here? Or whatever, he'd just say these things. But yeah. So
and with all apologies to John Morgan, a subjective reversal is a little bit more than a Milton model language pattern.
Right.
No, and that the more you hear your husband snore, the more comfortable, whatever, and in love you will fall.
Yeah. No, I know that.
But I remember the first time out there, it was a hypnosis seminar. Dave was going to teach about hypnosis. And in the first day that we were out there, and possibly even the second day, Dave was as boring as hell. And we were sitting there going, is Dave doing anything? Is Dave doing anything? And with a little bit of help, we started chipping away at what was going on. But then on the last day there, Dave did a subjective reversal. And he called a woman up and he did this subjective reversal. And we just went, what the hell did he do?
And
we had no clue.
Okay, there you go.
And then, like a fly drawn to a pile of hot, you know what? I kept going back there.
Yeah, me too. I did 5 fun shops over the years. But can you give us a little bit more?
When I saw him again and do it again, and I was like really looking for, I didn't see anything.
Can you give us a clue as to what this was about? Like what, I know he did a subjective reversal, but what was the presenting problem and how did she?
Oh, I don't even remember the presenting problems. I think the first time it was a woman who had problems with her business. And every time she thought about her business problem, she would freeze and the situation would get worse.
Yeah. So basically, just in summary for people, so they know what we're talking about. I think an explanation I gave a few weeks ago, podcasts ago, is pretty accurate. And that is that human beings have subjective responses to things, right? We see objects like this box of mints and we go like, oh, that's a terrifying box of mints. We have subjective responses to objective things. NLP has always been about the study of the structure of subjective experience, right? So how do we have this subjective response? So a subjective response might be like in the little quote, this is my notebook that I found from Dave's workshops in the 80s. But my little notes from there about, how the woman was upset about the husband snoring. Dave asked her, well, what would be the opposite of that feeling? And she'd say, well, I'd be calm and relaxed. So Dave worked it out so that the subjective response to the snoring, instead of being upset, was the opposite of the upset. So we reversed the subjective response. It was literally the opposite. So she became calm and relaxed when she heard her husband snoring. So that's what we're talking about, is finding a way to take whatever the stimuli is, the subjective thing is, whatever response the person has, and finding how to use that same stimuli to create a different response, a completely opposite response.
Now, the more time I spent with the old bugger, the more I started noticing. But subjective reversal was absolutely beyond me. And when we went to Dave's last fun shop, and we wrote down, remember, we put a pad together of all the things that we wanted Dave to teach us how to do.
Yeah.
And instead, he went back to the old stuff about Freud and Sigmund Freud and so forth. And I was sitting there going, this was the last chance. And then the subjective reversal videos appeared.
God,
So
I
excited.
must have.
I'm going to learn subjective reversal. 3 videos
Wow.
filmed.
I just don't even know how I don't even know these existed. They just went right over my head. That's amazing.
So
3
I'm
videos.
watching the videos.
Yeah.
And they are like watching Dave live. In other words, Dave starts out talking about therapy and Sigmund Freud and what he got right and hypnosis. And these are long ass videos.
Yeah.
3 videos.
Yeah. If I may, if you don't know Dave's work, he talks slowly, and he's got a lot of.
And he had a studio audience. They were under lights, and they had, I think, at least two cameras going.
Yeah.
And so it was better than any video that had been created.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And I'm watching it and going, I haven't the faintest idea what the hell Dave is talking about. And I put the videos away and I didn't think of anything. And then, to be honest, little bits of Dave have dropped in over the years going, oh, I know what he was doing there. I know what he was doing there. And then you had Charles Faulkner on. Sorry, Charles. And he talked about subjective reversal. And I went, no, that can't be right. And I dug up my videos and I did something really odd. Even for me, I do odd things all the time. There's a new AI agent called Manus. And I uploaded the videos one at a time to Manus. And I said, now, please analyze these videos. And I also uploaded transcripts. Other than that, it didn't know anything about Dave's work.
Wow.
And lo and behold, people kept telling me software can't analyze video. There is no AI software that can analyze video. There is nothing can happen with this. And then I started reading how it described what Dave did. And I'm going, holy cow, it literally cracked the code. So first of all, number one is Dave got a lot of his information, as he used to say, from watching the critters in front of him or the lab animals. He would pay attention to micro movements that they made. Nothing got past the old bugger. A flicker of the eye, instantaneous, he would notice that. And he would be looking for patterns of these behaviors. And he would be looking for shifts in behaviors. And what Dave was looking for were, what were the patterns? What were the triggers that were setting off this bad feeling, which he referred to as kinesthesia? And if you ever asked Dave what kinesthesia was, he defined it as, well, it's a bad feeling around your midline. And that was it. And I go, yeah, but what is kinesthesia? Okay, it's a bad feeling, but like, how do you get there? Is there, does it have a street address? How do you get kinesthesia? And then over time, I realized that kinesthesia was the output in Dave's world of the other than conscious processes that were going on in the brain that the person was displaying for you in split-second timing, and Dave saw the process. Now, Dave would see, oh, there is a visual memory trigger that's likely in there triggering this off. oh, this person is triggering a visual memory, then there's an auditory, and then they're getting the bad feeling. Now remember, all of this happens in a split second, in a blink of an eye. And so Dave, facing the audience and trained to know this, was paying attention the entire time to what the people were doing. And so to cut to the bottom line, is the actual subjective reversal process is found on video number 3. But video number 1 and 2 are all the work that Dave did to enable video number 3.
So let me just stop you there. So again, I know what you're talking about. People might not be quite certain about what it is that you're talking about. So basically, Dave was setting a lot of anchors, if you will, groundwork with a woman who is going to ultimately be his subject in the subjective reversal for the demo that he was going to do. She was going to be the demo subject. So he was setting a lot of things up in the first 2 videos in addition. So it's not as simple, although it is actually, relatively speaking, a simple process, actually. I've actually done it with people many times over the years without thinking, oh, this is a subjective reversal. I just, knew what I wanted to have the outcome be, probably based on those notes that I took in 1988. But it is, when Dave does it on that 3rd video, it is a good deal more subtle in his approach. And it's also really interesting to watch him work, because he actually isn't getting the responses that he wants at first from her. You can tell he's trying to set something up, and then he doesn't get it. And so he's got to, go around another way. It's really interesting to see his flexibility and approach to watching how he does that.
So video number 1 is Dave giving his history of modern psychology, Freud, transactional analysis, all the big therapies that are still popular today. But that was in if we were looking at a magician on the stage, and Dave was a magician, that would be his patter. That would be what he does to distract the audience. And during that time, Dave is working with everyone covertly the entire time. And the AI picked up on things like Dave shifts his vocal tonality when he's apparently working with different individuals. The AI picked up that Dave is anchoring by shifting his position or pointing or leaning his head forward or looking at a particular individual. And I'm going, that sneaky son of a bitch. So he is in video number 1, which is this long, seriously boring thing where he's explaining conceptually what his philosophy is and why hypnosis is good and everything else is bad, and how he's grateful to NLP and whatever. The spiel that we heard 100 times, it was his magician's patter to get his anchors into the people that he wanted to work with. Now, Dave didn't just work with one person. Dave worked with everybody in the room. So if you were at a Dave seminar, if you were at a Dave fun shop, and you looked around the room, you would see different people were off in trance land because Dave had gathered these trance anchors and would fire them so he could teach the people in a totally different state and make them comfortable with working with him. So far, so good?
Mm-hmm.
So he continues in video 2 with the same thing, except he pauses and does his famous beach induction. And I'm going, oh, okay, first time I saw it. Why is he doing the beach? Why is he doing the beach here? This is all about subjective reversal. Why is he doing the beach? And by the way, if you think back, Dave never did the subjective reversal process early in the fun shop.
No.
It was only after a couple of days when Dave pretty much had picked out who he wanted to work with, had his anchors into that, and they had experienced at least the beach process.
Yeah.
Plus, he did some age regression work when he sent people out to English camp.
Right. Yeah. So also, I would just say when he finally does do the subjective reversal with the subject, the volunteer for the demo, everyone seems to what Dave called tailgate the process. So they would, he'd be working with really the whole room. They'd all be going into trance at the same time.
And I guess the video is more explicit because if you're listening to the video, part 3 of subjective reversal, Dave is directly recalling and anchoring their trip to the beach.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So first is the covert hypnosis, then comes the tuxedo trance, and now while he's talking to the person in his different tonality,
exactly,
he recalls the beach to anchor all of the hypnotic stuff that he had done, and he proceeds to offer them the opportunity to re-examine things without specifying what they were, but knowing the person's patterns and pointing and anchoring in those directions and offering them the opportunity to re-experience that in a totally different way. So, for example, when a person would be a see feeler or a hear feeler, see feel, I would visual image would set it off, or hearing something would set it off. Dave would encourage them to, by metaphor, to experience the entire gamut of full sensory experience because they were going on something that had occurred in the past. And of course, Dave was known for his explanation of how did Dave view the brain? What did he compare it to? Remember? It was his metaphor for the brain. He would cut the brain open as if you were looking at it from the top. And he said,
yes, the filing cabinets.
The filing cabinet. And he was saying people were cross-filing.
Right.
They had an experience, and then something was going on, and it triggered their cross-filing of a past experience.
Yeah.
So without knowing or even asking what the past experience was, because Dave didn't believe that was necessary, he called people's internal experience their private garden. He would encourage them to use all of their sensory systems to understand that there was a lot of cross-filing going on. And that was then, and this was now. Now, because Dave was doing this, and it was the end of the third video series, if you listen to it, he also included elements of his housekeeping in there, which was his most famous trance work for letting a person change something that was in the past.
When you say famous, I think that needs to be in quotes, because certainly his beach trip thing was the most widely distributed as far as his
right,
etc.
I had heard of Dave only from his beach trip,
right?
And frankly, I wasn't impressed.
Oh, you weren't?
But the first time I heard it, I was like, no. But then when the AI listened to over time, I got much more impressed with it. But if you saw what the AI was doing and Dave describing the rich experience, he was putting those sensory things in to send people back to a time when they were experiencing all of their senses simultaneously and feeling really good about them.
So, Harlan, if I may ask you then, is there a succinct step-by-step procedure that AI or you have discerned and delineated for the subjective reversal? Like what's step 1, step 2, step 3?
I keep trying to put it in, so like, here's the NLP model of the 6-step reframe.
That's it. It's what it's what I want.
Here we want. And the answer to that is no.
Harlan, damn it.
I'm sorry. But there are people who come to you with problems, and Dave would spend time with them, getting his anchors into them and setting them and working with them and telling them his stuff and telling them stories. But the entire time Dave was doing that, he was just getting his anchors into them.
So if there were a step-by-step procedure, I guess step 1 would be to get your anchors into them.
That would definitely be step 1, is engage the client and get your anchors into them.
Anchors
for trust, comfort, relaxation, hypnosis. Get what Dave called slices of the salami of hypnosis.
Right, he called it the Stalin method of hypnosis.
Right, where you grab a slice here, a slice there, and you build a sandwich. So he would be building his sandwich of hypnotic anchors. So that would be the first step.
Okay, so that'd be the first step. What's the second step?
Second step is to have the person experience hypnosis, in his case, the beach trip, but the beach trip specifically, rather than just any hypnotic experience, because it pushed the person into all sensory systems. And the suggestions in the beach trip are just so wonderful for the person that so many people have heard it. Now, in the world of hypnosis, I don't know whether people heard Dave's beach trip because it was so popular and passed it around. But if you listen to people's beach inductions, non-Dobson inductions, and you compare it with Dave's, the richness of language and the richness of sensory systems and the tonality shifts and the building in the anchors one at a time.
So let me just stop you there, Dave. Sorry, keep calling you Dave.
There we go, twice again.
Did it again.
When I appear on that list of experts, it's going to say Dave.
That's what I meant. That's what I meant. What we really mean is what I learned from Harlan. So step 2 would be to do the beach trip in order to have a really rich sensory experience and have all the channels open.
Right.
So that when he then is having the person sit in the chair and do the subjective reversal. He has the anchors set up for the trust and the comfort, et cetera, that you set up. But also, as he starts reminding them of the beach trip, then they open up all their senses and they have a full array of resources available to them.
Yes. Now,
what would be
one more piece.
Okay. Is this step 3 or is this more piece?
This is connected to 1 and 2.
Okay.
Is that because Dave has been paying attention to them,
mm-hmm.
by the time they get to step 3, Dave already knows what the problem is.
Okay.
And so I remember once when I put together a group for Dave, and I said, Dave, do you want me to find out what the people would want to work on when they come to see you? And he was like, no, I'll get that when they walk into the room. And I realized he wasn't kidding. He
mm-hmm.
would sit there. I've told the story before, but the last full fun shop that I was with Dave was held in the rehab center in Friday Harbor. And at that point, we knew David just had a heart attack, and he came, and I decided to position myself off to the side where instead of facing Dave, I was watching the audience. And Dave, I guess at some point figured out, well, you know what? Harlan's serious enough. I might as well let him sit there. And I was watching Dave and the audience for the first time. And Dave started talking. And midway through his patter, right, opening patter, there was a guy taking pictures of him. And he said, oh, you want to take pictures of me? But you're not getting me from the right side. Maybe you could switch over to the left side because I look so much better from the left side. Could you take place, young lady? And he motioned to a lady. Would you mind changing seats so he could take pictures of me? And everybody gets up and whatever. And there's a break. And the woman comes up to me. Remember, she was just asked to change pictures so this guy could get better pictures of Dave, change seats. So this guy could get better pictures from his good side. And she comes up to me and says, I can't go back in there. And I said, why not? She goes, because Dave knows. I said, what does he know? Dave knows my problem. I said, yeah. And she goes, and do you know my problem? I said, yeah. She goes, I'm too embarrassed to go back in there. And I said, well, I would look at it differently. If Dave identified what your problem was without even talking to you, isn't it possible that he might have a solution for you without talking to you directly? And she said, oh, I never thought about that. And she went back into the room. What was Dave doing? He had been doing his patter. And one of the things that he did in his patter was talk about people who had different problems and issues. And one of his, quote, jokes was that he could go into a room and tell who had been raped by the way he pronounced the word therapist. Now, he never said, as Richard Bandler did, the rapist, but just by saying, by the way they pronounced it, a person who had been raped would respond. And Dave saw it. And he saw the exact kinesthetic, the exact pattern of kinesthesia that the person was doing. And so if he were to work with a person about a problem, sometimes they volunteered it, but they didn't have to because he already knew, and he already knew the pattern. So it's kind of like, walking into a car showroom. It's already been through the assembly line. Everything has been there. All you need to do is put the key in and or click it and drive off the lot. By the time Dave got to the subjective reversal, 99% of the work had already been done.
Okay, cool. So what's step 3?
Step 3 is, if they talk about the problem, they're going to display it again, this time probably in slower motion if they talk about it.
Okay, let me stop you there. So in the case of the woman that did the demo, so he brings her up on stage. He starts, well, I guess stage is let's just for lack of.
No, you said stage. We have to go with stage.
And he sits her down in the chair and he starts talking to her and has fires off these anchors for comfort and stuff. And then he does some reminding of the beach trip while she's beginning to go into trance. When does he do step 3?
So step 3, at some point when Dave goes, who would like to see a subjective reversal? And people were like, whatever, would you like to come up and volunteer? And he picks the person who he knew all along he was going to work with and says, what would you like to work on today? And before the words even come out of the mouth, the woman is already displaying non-verbally her patterns again.
Okay, so he does actually ask verbally, what would you like to work on?
Right, but if the person didn't do it and go, oh, I'm too embarrassed, whatever. But generally, Dave did most of his therapy work privately, so it wasn't an issue.
Right. So what would be step 4?
So step 4 would be taking them through metaphorically experiences, reminding them of the anchors, particularly of the filing cabinet and misfiling. And as they went through the experience, Dave was known to interrupt patterns and point out and install other patterns.
Yeah.
And if Dave interrupted the pattern at a crucial time and replaced it with a different pattern, it would be a very serious interruption. Now, one of the things that Dave did as an exercise, and we never connected it, was David would have David, he's his mother. Dave would have people experience a negative experience, and they would tell their tale of woe. And Dave would watch carefully all of their nonverbals. And then, with a little break state in between, Dave would start telling them a joke. And when he got to the punchline of the joke, he would replay back to them all of their nonverbals from the negative experience.
Right.
And it's like putting a humidifier and a dehumidifier right next to each other and saying, all right, guys, have it out.
Right.
And it pretty much blew the pattern out of the water, even non-verbally.
Right. So that is an exercise I've done many times with my classes in Ericksonian hypnosis, telling people, of course, that it wasn't Erickson, it was Dobson. But that's the kind of thing where we would, and this might have been an advantage in a funny sort of way that Dobson had, is that, he was deaf. He was really deaf totally in one ear, mostly deaf in the other ear, and he had these very obtrusive, very big hearing aids. in his ears, and a wire that went from one to the other. So the totally deaf ear would have a wire in it, so it was a receiver only. Put things over here. So his auditory acuity wasn't that great. So his visual acuity may well have been amped up, if you will, because he relied more on his, what he could see than what he could hear.
But when Dave would crack,
what would we do? So let me just say. So what he would do when we would do the negative stuff.
Are you interrupting?
What he had us do when we did listen to the negative story, the yucky story, is he wouldn't listen to the yucky story. He just watched the yucky story. So in the exercises that we do, we'd have people literally across the room from each other. So they couldn't hear each other's yucky content. So they weren't listening to the yucky content. They were just watching the person's nonverbal communication as they displayed how their other than conscious communication was communicating this yuckiness. And then Dave would have us repeat that kind of nonverbal yucky other than conscious communication while telling a joke. And Dave got so good at it, of course, that, he would just be telling jokes all the time. While you're in therapy, I did a session with him once where he was just really kind of imitating me the whole time, non-verbally, and telling these jokes. I didn't know really what the hell he was doing, but it was funny.
So because he told jokes so often and called it a fun shop instead of a workshop, when Dave would sit down and immediately tell a little joke to make the person feel comfortable, they didn't realize that Dave was breaking their patterns as soon as they sat down.
So is that then step 4 for the subjective reversal?
Start using these non-verbal pattern interrupts.
Okay, got it. So what's step number 5?
Is replace them through metaphor and hypnosis.
Okay, good.
And just encouraging them. So for example, if you listen to the beach tape, I call it a tape, even though there's no tape anymore.
It was a tape for a long, long time.
Or you listen to it, or you listen to housekeeping. At the end, by that time, you are like so deep and lost that Dave is giving some pretty explicit instructions. And if you listen to the end of that, the entire end of that is the subjective reversal process.
The entire end of what?
End of the beach process.
Is a subjective reversal.
No, I'm sorry, not the beach process. The housekeeping.
House cleaning, yeah.
House cleaning, housekeeping. If you go back and listen to the end of that, it is Dave. The person is now in a tuxedo trance, and Dave and they. If you listen to the house cleaning, keeping, whichever one, there is so much dissociation in that. I remember at the end of one of the things, I said, Dave, how many levels of dissociation did you have in there? And Dave's response was, well, Harlan, you're going to still use your left brain to analyze everything I do? Yeah, Dave.
No, I'll use AI instead. How's that?
I'll use AI. He would have killed me.
Would have killed you.
But if you listen to the end of that process, Dave is saying, and those experiences, like John Morgan said, which used to trigger this, can trigger something happy instead.
Right. Which is why, obviously, vastly more effective in a one-on-one situation, so they know what you're talking about, and you have set those things up rather than that just being a language pattern sort of thing. So, for
example, if we think about it, one of the disputes, Dave presented for Tony Robbins, and it was recorded. And in the first part, it's a big crowd.
By the way, I was there. That was the first time I'd ever seen Dave. It was my experience with Dave. Yeah.
And Dave did his whole brain thing, remember?
Yeah, I do remember it well.
and he was doing his brain thing. Now this is NLP is pretty much at its height. Tony is you know, the powerhouse. Grinder is gone. Bandler was, you know, busy on trial.
No, this is before the trial. This is 85.
Okay. Trial was later. Okay. Yeah. So, but Tony was the one doing the teaching. And here comes Dave, and he starts teaching about Freud and all of the stuff about the brain. He's doing that to get his anchors in with people. And lo and behold, then the next thing he does is the beach.
Yep. Yes. And by the way, just to tell you again, it was my first experience with Dave. I was there during that first part of the seminar.
That's on video too, by the way.
That I'm there?
No. Well, I haven't looked for you on there because
no, but the beach trip is on video too, you're saying?
No. Well, the beach trip is on video too. I know because I filmed it.
So what's on video too? What did you say?
No. I'm talking about the Tony Robbins thing when Dave spoke for Tony Robbins.
Yeah.
There are 2 videos.
Yeah. That's what I'm talking about.
Right. Video 1 there was the whole history of psychology.
Yeah.
And how Dave was right and everybody else was wrong. Mm-hmm. And 2 was the beach trip.
Exactly. So I just wanted to say that I was there, and that when Dave was doing the first part, so Tony Robbins seminar, people have been like cranking it for high speed energy stuff for days now. And then Dave comes up and he starts, walking around with his hand on his hip and just talking. And I could have sworn he was smoking a cigarette the whole time, but he wasn't. I don't think I didn't see any cigarettes on the video. So he wasn't smoking. He's a big smoker. But then he'd be talking like this, and he'd be doing his little storytelling, and half the people in the room were asleep. I mean, half the people in the room, if they weren't asleep, they were really struggling not to fall asleep. And I was like, wow, this guy's so interesting. And then when we did the beach trip, he had us all lie down on the floor. And I swear to God, I remember the number 5. I sort of have vague memories of the number 4, but, half an hour later, I woke up, and it was like, okay, this guy's doing something more than I just thought he was doing. So I need to learn. That's why I decided to go to my first fun shop in 86. So yeah, pretty amazing stuff. Dave was a unique character, and I think you've helped us shed a little bit of light on it. Now, if there was I forgot where we left off, step 6, if there was more, what else would there have been?
Step 6 is the Dave checking his work to see if the pattern is there.
Gotcha. Yeah. Good.
But with all of those things, not now. I have the analysis transcribed. I'm editing it and put it out, and it does pretty much go into all of the explanations, but it's not a NLP 1 session, sit down, whatever. We have all those books about Erickson seeing somebody one time and whoa, he's just, Erickson would tell them the story and they would go. That's probably not the majority of the cases.
Definitely not. Erickson worked with people many times. He worked with one woman that fairly famous situation where he was able to induce color blindness. Entranced, she was colorblind. He worked with her like 300 times. So this is not, fix your phobia.
Unfortunately, we come from the world of the NLP of the instant phobia cure,
right, exactly.
or physiology of excellence, where you can change a person's state in seconds.
Yeah.
This wasn't like that. This is classical Dobsonian, Ericksonian. Did Milton notice these things? Probably, for sure. When
I remember when Dave talked about seeing Milton, Dave, when I teach neo-Erickson hypnosis, I'm teaching a lot of Dobson stuff, but also things that I learned about Erickson's work from other people that he trained, but I never met Erickson. So I learned from Gilligan, et cetera, et cetera. But I remember when Dave talked about his singular meeting with Erickson, he was going like, oh my God, he's talking to their other than conscious, so Dave taught other than conscious communication. And he said, wow, oh my God, Milton Erickson is talking to their other than conscious. So he saw Erickson doing what he did with people. I think you perhaps saw that better than other people. Did you know that story? Did you hear?
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that story. Yeah. So, and his only regret was that he didn't get to see Erickson when he was at his prime. Only much later.
Well, a lot of people would say that same thing about Dave too, if they were coming to those later fun shops.
He was probably nastier in his early years. But what we didn't get to see, except in this case, is we never got to see his client sessions. And even Dave, I remember dealing with a client who was severe anorexic. I mean, eating nothing. And this was back in the days when I had my hypnosis practice, and I had it filmed, but I had it filmed from above. And I was really proud of, like, I was paying such attention to everything that she was doing and helping her, shifting systems and so forth. And at the end, she went home and she ate. And I was like, whoa. And that was it. And I made a copy of the video and I sent it to Dave. And Dave said, well, congratulations that she's eating, but I don't know what the fuck you were doing. And I felt so happy at that moment because it was exactly like we were watching Dobson work. And without being able to look at the person and see all of their micro movements, you wouldn't understand. And not seeing me matching, leading, etc., you would have no clue.
Cool. Good for you.
The only thing would have been is if there was, the camera on the person's face and the camera on Dave's face, or actually their entire bodies at the synced the exact same time, then we probably could have, done much better decoding than we got today. But I think that the AI analysis of Dave and how he shifted tones strategically and the use of his physical anchors and his time shifts and his position of his body, I think it did a really good job.
So, Harlan, thank you again. And people are probably going to be wondering where they can see this video. Is it still available? We got it from Barbara Stepp, did we not?
Yes, we did. And unfortunately, Barb's websites are gone. People have emailed her and the emails are bouncing. She had a stroke. I called her some time ago at the number that I had, and she answered the phone and she sounded rather good, but I understand there are no more trainings and all of the sites are down. So unfortunately for right now, it's just not available.
Is there anything available? Is there any transfer?
Well, yes, there's going to be very shortly. There's going to be the Subjective Reversal book, which is a comprehensive analysis of this, including a summary of the steps of what to do. So that is is in its final editing. It is going to be a massive book, and I guarantee you that if Dave saw it, his first comment would be, how the fuck could you get all of this wrong?
Don't you know anything, Harlan?
Don't you know anything? You came here and you spent all that time with your fucking left brain.
Your head up your ass.
Your head up your ass. Pull your head out, Harlan, until you hear that sucking sound.
He used to accuse us of having, what was it?
RCV.
RCV, yes, rectal canal vision.
But meanwhile, all of a sudden, I understand what the old guy was doing.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like I said, I've done these. I've done subjective reversals, but it's obviously not nearly as elegantly as Dave did. But the bottom line is, people would change. They would have this anchor for this response, and be it as it may, to speak whatever you will of John Morgan and the things, we helped an awful lot of people quit smoking with that directive. That idea of that thing, whatever it is, that thing that used to cause X will now cause Y, is what we're talking about. It's a subjective reversal. And if it can be the opposite of it, then it's kind of like a collapsing of anchors as well. So there's lots of things we have done, we being NLPers and hypnosis people, who have essentially gotten the same result. Ultimately, bottom line is that the person doesn't have that same response anymore. Now they have this response. So,
and there was plenty of anchoring going on during the process.
Yeah. So very cool. Very cool. Let us know when you have that book done. I guess AI is helping with that, eh?
Yes, except the editing is all me.
Okay.
So we will let you know. I hope people watching this got something out of it. It's always fun to come on and share with people the lost teachings of Dave Dobson, because unfortunately, because of Dave's craziness, his teachings are pretty much going to be lost. So we're doing our part, Doug with the podcast, me with analyzing his stuff, so that maybe a handful will be able to have these techniques.
Yeah, and as I said, I've been teaching him for years in my, Ericksonian hypnosis classes, and it is a big reason why I've switched to calling it Neo-Ericksonian hypnosis, because it is, of course, past. Erik Erikson died in 1980. I've learned everything that I know from people that, not Erikson, but from Dobson or the other people that I've learned from Gilligan. So all the trainings that I do incorporate a lot of Dobsonian hypnosis in there as well. And yet it's a little bit akin to the old thing about what Erikson said about Bandler and Grinder. Those boys, they think they got me in a nutshell. Well, they may have the shell, but they ain't got the nut.
And there you go.
Thank you, Harlan Kilstein.
Pleasure to be here.
Until next time.
Okay, I will be looking to see my name on the experts.
Oh, I will definitely put it on I don't even know where that list is, but I'll find it. Maybe I'll have Manus generated or something.
There you go.
Okay, bye-bye. This has been the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure seeing you again. Hope to see you again real soon. Come back next week when we have another gripping and exciting episode of the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. And if you want to, you can find out more about us, each and every one of us, at essentialcoachingskills.com. Thanks.